Welcome back to Walk with TFB. Tim Bryson here, and as y'all know, I'm a Black millennial with eager to have unfiltered conversation with authentic people centered on international education, global sport, and Black culture. Today, we are back with I guess, a returning guest, from multiple different occasions. Last time we heard this guest was last September 26, 2003, when they discussed more about athlete futures abroad, which I know we'll dive into a little bit more on this episode. Then this individual also participated in our 2024 Internationalization Athletic Summit. So someone who is not just familiar with Walk with TAB, but also has continued to provide immeasurable value and insight into their respective markets. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my friend, my colleague, family at this point, sister. Is that a thing
I
now?
think so. I think we're there. Yeah.
What's up, Lucy? How you doing, man?
Thank you so much for having me back, Tim. It's great to be back. I mean, we're probably like pretty fed up of each other at the minute. I saw you in San Diego in October, London in November, start of November. I can't remember what it was, but
Yeah.
yeah, it feels strange to be virtual, but it's so nice to see you again. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. There's so many interesting things going on in the world of international student recruitment and the international education sector as a whole.
It really is. And I mean, to your point about like, you being here in San Diego, me being over in the UK, which I just remembered that did just happen last month, which is kind of wild to think about. We're now like what is this, late November, heading into 2025. A lot has changed in the landscape, and it's changing in the landscape for a number of different reasons. But before we jump into that, Lucy, again, I know we mentioned before you were on a previous podcast and as part of our summit, but for those who have not had the chance to listen to those episodes quite yet, segment one, just tell us a little bit more about who you are and what's your story.
Absolutely. It's crazy how fast time flies. I can't believe it was last September since I was on the podcast. But yeah, I'm Lucy. I'm the founder of Athlete Futures Abroad, which is a company that specializes in helping student athletes in the US to come and study here in the UK. We help students from all backgrounds, from high school upwards, club athletes, but we primarily specialize in helping collegiate varsity athletes to come and study their graduate degrees here in the UK, because there's so many amazing opportunities from getting your master's in 1 year, the fact that it's a lot cheaper here in the UK, and also the big bonus why most collegiate athletes come here to the UK, it is that they can continue competing. Even if they've exhausted all their eligibility, they can come here. So it's a really exciting opportunity. And as you've touched upon, with everything that's going on in the current education landscape, it's a really great opportunity, and we're seeing a peak in students looking to go overseas. So yeah, an exciting job.
Super dope. And so for those who might be familiar with AFA, like how does it work? Like what is AFA? You mentioned it a little bit, but like how does it work? How do athletes get connected with you? How do they find schools, etc.?
Yeah, so our sort of main product is our digital platform. So student athletes can connect virtually with universities across the UK, which means that you can connect pretty much instantly. So you don't need to wait for a recruitment rep to be in country or in your state or, wherever you might be studying. You can connect instantly via our digital platform. But we also do lots of other things. We do in-person events. That's why I was in San Diego and Los Angeles earlier in the fall. So we visit US institutions, US universities, we do lunch and learns, we do panel sessions, we go to SAC meetings. It's really great fun. We bring universities with us. And then we also do digital things such as podcasts like this, but we also do lots on Instagram, lots on TikTok, which we'll be launching in the new year for student athletes to learn about those opportunities here in the UK. And it's not just me talking, it's not just AFA staff. You get to hear from students themselves. So where possible, we try and have student athletes that have been through the process involved as much as we can, so you can hear about their stories. So not only can you hear about their exciting journeys to the UK, but you can hear about fun foods that they've tried, foods that they've not liked so much, what they think of the British weather, those kind of things. So yeah, definitely, I would definitely recommend, whether you're an athletics professional, administrator, a coach, or a student athlete, checking on our social media, particularly when we launch some really fun projects early in the new year, and you'll get to hear lots of stories about studying abroad.
See, this is interesting, Lucy, for a number of different reasons, because now you and I have been connected almost 2 years at this point, which is takes us back to 2022. But I remember being back in Maryland in 2019 and getting emails from recruiters over in the UK saying, "Hey, we would love to come talk to your athletes in Maryland, yada yada yada." And quite honestly, and I tried to find the emails. I ignored every single email because to me, it was like, it's too good to be true. Like, there's no way that this could be a pathway or opportunity for college athletes. So if you're having these conversations both in person and through the digital space as well, like how are you introducing or how are you massaging that conversation, if you will, to help people understand like, yo, this is actually a real opportunity. There's real, opportunity for you to be abroad, for you to what's that conversation like?
I think that's a really good point, Tim, because it's so true. When you've learnt your whole life, if you're an athlete from the States, that once your eligibility is over, you either go professional or you move into an alternative career. I can completely understand why when somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, no, no, everything you've learned is wrong. You can actually come and study in the UK. As long as you're a student, you can keep competing. You can do a 1-year master's, you can do a 3-year PhD, you could be an athlete, for another 4 or 5 years if you really want to." I completely understand why people think, no, it's too good to be true. So we do lots of things. We do education pieces. We start small. We start with just those little bits of information. But for me, the big thing is here allowing students in the US, current student athletes, to hear from other athletes that have gone through the process themselves, because that makes it real and that helps them to be familiarize themselves with the process and tap into those sort of personal stories. So wherever we can, whether it's digital on the platform, whether it's on social media, or whether it's in person, we always try and have student athletes who've gone through the process themselves with us in attendance. But I think something that I absolutely love to see is that quite often those student athletes who've gone through that process themselves then become so passionate about it that they end up working for the universities that they studied at here in the UK. So UK universities quite often have representatives across the US to help with recruitment, to help with alumni activity, and so on. And those athletes are so passionate about telling their story and helping other athletes learn that it's not a scam and that it's real, that they will then go into colleges, they'll come in with us and they'll attend those events that we run. And it's just so nice to see them go full circle and, come back and speak to their universities that they studied at and help athletes at other universities as well learn about their options.
It's good. I'm gonna take this segment too because again, we've had this conversation at the foundational level a couple times now. And getting a segment two really focused on strategy, observations, trends, insights, perspective, etc. But can I start this segment without first acknowledging that this is 2024 International Education Week? So for those who are unfamiliar, International Ed Week is an opportunity to celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide. But more specifically, and quite honestly, most importantly, this is a joint initiative of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Education, which I think is I asked you earlier, right, is a very important distinction to make when recognizing, where is it celebrated, how is it
Yeah.
celebrated. But nevertheless, Athlete Futures Abroad is an example of, what international education, especially within sport, can look like between the U.S. and the U.K. So given that you've been in this field for a number of different years now, what have you seen observation-wise over the last, we can really take it like 4 to 6 years if COVID is our, semi midpoint in regards to behaviors or who's coming over to the UK. Just give us some more insight in regards to what you've seen from your end.
Absolutely. And I think one of the great things over the past 5, 10 years is that so many more athletes are following the process of coming to the UK, and so many students in general, students that aren't athletes as well. So the opportunity to go and study overseas, whether that's for a summer period, whether it's for a semester, whether it's for a grad degree, is becoming more familiar and more common. So we've definitely seen a rise in US student numbers coming to the UK. But I think a really interesting trend that stands out is I think study portals, who are another online platform who help students around the world study overseas. They released some statistics after Donald Trump's election win was announced a few weeks ago. I think there was a fivefold increase in students looking to go overseas from the US. So I think, it'd be really naive of us to ignore the impact that politics globally have on students' desires to study abroad. So you've not only got those sort of trends with students being influenced by their peers, but you've also got global sort of happenings and political landscapes impacting students' decisions. So yeah, there's lots going on. And I think another thing that I've noticed, particularly over the past year or so, is that collegiate administrators and coaches are also becoming a lot more familiar with these opportunities. So it's a really exciting time for us at AFA and for UK universities as a whole to visit the US and, not just have to give that basic foundational level, but we can really engage on a higher level. So we can explain the application process to students, we can drill down into their questions, and it's a really exciting time. But yeah, exciting and busy for everyone.
So you mentioned the U.S. presidential election, and I know y'all just had an election over in the U.K. as well.
Mhm.
Have you seen or anticipate any implications that would facilitate or inhibit student recruitment into the UK inbound?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing for both the US and the UK is that the most recent statistics show that the UK had its highest ever student numbers from the most recent statistics, which I think was the academic year ending 2023. And today I've just seen that the US has also had its highest number ever of international enrollments. Now, it's really interesting to see how both elections will impact those numbers moving forward. But yeah, here in the UK, it started off a bit more positive. So the previous government were looking at potentially putting caps on international students coming into the UK. They were looking at being a lot stricter on immigration. But I mean, within the first few days of the new government being in place, we did see some reassurances that international students were welcome in the UK and they will always be welcome. But again, it's still very early days, not as early as it is for you guys over in the US. But yeah, we I guess are apprehensive. We're waiting with bated breath to see what will happen, what policies will be rolled out. But I'm hopeful that it will be, a more positive landscape for incoming international students here in the UK. But let's wait and see, hey.
Did you say waiting with bated breath?
Yeah, is that not a...
Never heard that. Never
Oh my
heard.
goodness. You're learning all the phrases today. What was the other one?
A pass, a pause.
Oh, a pat. Yeah, that's like British slang. It's like
Apparently,
yeah, like girl slang, a paz, like apparently. Yeah. It's not a formal saying. Let's not use it all the time.
no, 100%. I got you. You mentioned obviously politics is one area to which is again facilitating and inhibiting recruitment mobility. But we've also seen, particularly in the UK, is the influence and really the growth of American football, particularly the NFL. So
Yeah.
can you just talk from your perspective, again, your perspective, your lived experience, your expertise, if you will, how, if at all, is NFL presence, increased NFL presence, shaping, interest in students wanting to come over and compete post-grad study?
Oh, that's a great question. From my perspective, it's such an exciting time. So, I mean, I've been running AFA now for 2.5 years, and prior to that, I worked at a UK university for 5 years. So, in that 7.5 year period, I have just seen interest in American football skyrocket. So, I think the first thing to say is obviously it's not comparable to the States. So if you're going to come and play American football and you've played it at a US college or even a US high school, playing at a college here in the UK is very different. But that is the advice I always give to students. You cannot expect it to be the same. You're coming for a different experience. However, I think if we look forward to the next 7.5, 10 years, we're going to see the quality improve drastically because you have, the NFL Academy are now based at a UK university, Loughborough University, which I think they've been based there for nearly 2 years now. So they bring international talent from around the world into the academy. And then the aim is for those student athletes to, go and play in the college setup in the States and then eventually make it into the NFL. And I think that influence, so having the NFL invested in college sport here in the UK is only going to help those college programs that aren't NFL related, like the one at Loughborough is. So the NFL Academy is very different. It sits very separately to college sport. But I think we're seeing from a lot of the online presence of the NFL Academy, the international games that are played here in the UK, with the NFL teams, we are seeing interest in American football increase drastically. And from my perspective, it's just so exciting. But I know you attended an NFL game recently, didn't you? October, November.
October,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah, and I think it'd be cool to like get your insight as what you from what you thought as an American coming here and watching it in the UK.
man. It was surreal. And it was
Yeah.
surreal because I'm like, I went to that Wembley 2023, like after the games had ended. And I'm like, I could see an NFL game being played here. Like the stadium was big enough, it looked big enough from the outside. They had little shops and stores around the area, very similar to the different complexes they're building in both the college and professional space in the United States right now. But then going like last month, I was like, yo, there are people, there are fans, like fans. And I
Mhm.
think I made it a point to talk to almost every single Cincinnati Bengals fan I could find. Being that I'm from Cincinnati, and I'm like, yo, like how, like the Bengals obviously aren't playing, but
Mhm.
like what? But you got a jersey on, so like, why are you a Bengals? Of all those teams you could have picked, right, between the Brady and Mahomes and everyone else, you picked the Bengals. And hearing the stories of people saying, when I first started watching American football, the Bengals lost in the Super Bowl. And so I always wanted to cheer for underdog. Or, I had a friend who visited Cincinnati, brought a jersey back. And just so hearing how like fandom was created was super interesting. Um, was very, very interesting to be honest. But then also the fan experience. It's like people not
Mhm.
knowing when to clap or clapping at the wrong moments. I'm like, yo, you
Yeah.
don't clap right now. Or like seeing the number of different jerseys happening. So I think for me it was like there's definitely interest there. And I think the more the NFL has spent time in the UK has been important and something we should not, take lightly. But I've also said, I think, especially between US and UK in particular, you mentioned the digital platform that, of course, that you run and facilitate. But I said a few months ago that the new college football game, the EA Sports football game on whatever the consoles, would help to increase international recruitment into the United States. I think
Mhm.
now you're starting to see more international players. They're playing with themselves, or their friends are playing with them on the game, and you're like, oh,
Mhm.
I hear that fight song, I want to go there, or I see that stadium, I want to go visit there. So I think that's what I'm interested in looking at in the future is like, can a video game increase international American football athlete recruitment into the U.S.
Well, that sounds like a new PhD for you.
No, no, no. I mean, listen, I got about a year and a half left. Nah, I'm cool. I'm cool.
I know a platform where you can sign up and learn all about coming to the UK.
Man, I would love to. I mean, honestly, if this happened, a few years ago, I probably would have taken that route. But I mean,
Yeah.
but you mentioned NFL Academy, even in an NBA Academy, and how they're using
Yeah.
social media. And I'm like, they're
Mhm.
using social media in particular in ways that, and I've said this publicly on LinkedIn in particular, thousands of times at this point, that other schools, both US and globally for that matter, are not thinking about using social media to recruit international students in general. Because we know that they're going to YouTube, they're going to Instagram, they're going to TikTok to see like what the campus looks like, what the student experience looks like. So why not invest more in that space? Am I tripping? Is that accurate?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, particularly Instagram and I know and TikTok as well, when I'm looking at anything, whether it's a hotel I'm looking to stay at, a restaurant I'm going to eat at, I don't go to their website. I go to their social media first. And I want to hear from people who visited. I want to, I don't want to read a review online. I want to hear it. I want to watch a reel. I want to hear what the food was like or hear what the hotel was like. And it's just the same for higher ed. People want to visualize it, like you say, they want to see what campus is like, they want to hear from the current students. So, yeah, I think over the coming years, universities will be and need to be using it a lot more for recruitment. But yeah, like you mentioned, the NFL Academy, they're smashing it on social media. It's very clean, it's student led. You get to have an insight into what the game is like,
Hmm.
and that will, I'm sure, generate a lot of inquiries for them just off the back of social media. And it's what students want nowadays.
True, especially this new generation coming in. Social media can obviously and digital platforms can obviously help to increase recruitment. But in your
Mhm.
experience, what have been some of the barriers, significant barriers, for American athletes or American students who want to do postgrad study in the UK? And how is AFA or others helping to mitigate those?
Yeah, good question. I think the main thing is finance, particularly for those athletes who have been on full ride scholarships. We just don't really have them in the UK. So it's an education piece. I work with the athletes to educate them that actually your overall degree is much cheaper here in the UK. And we do have scholarships. So, an athletic scholarship, there are some universities who offer big, big scholarships, but it's very rare. So you're typically looking at the 40, 50% mark on average in terms of fee reductions. But what a lot of athletes don't realize is actually that's bringing your fees down to like £8,000, so $10,000 for a master's degree at a top 10 UK university. So that is a huge barrier. It's, an education piece, but also helping the students to access information on those scholarships easily, and also learning that, there are opportunities for them, and sort of helping them to understand the opportunities that there are to fund their degree as well. So a lot of student athletes don't know that they can utilize US loans like FAFSA here in the UK, and helping them connect with the right people at UK universities to learn how they apply for it in the UK. It's exactly the same as it is in the States, and what they might need in terms of finance for living, those kind of things here in the UK as well. So yeah, that is a big barrier. And I guess again, it's all education, and sort of breaking down those barriers. So for athletes who've maybe never left the States before, if you're traveling from the East Coast, so particularly New York, and that sort of northeastern area, you can get to the UK in about 5 hours. So actually, it's quicker than flying over to California. And there's like hundreds of flights a day, particularly to those big cities. Um, you know, Boston, New York, Atlanta, Delta's big hub. There's hundreds of flights a day from the UK. So actually, sometimes it's easier to get over here and get home than it is to fly elsewhere in the States. So those education pieces are really key to us, helping athletes to learn about them, but also feel comfortable with the information they're getting. And that's what I love about my job. And yeah, that's what I love talking about on things like this on your podcast.
No, it is. I mean, it's education focused, as you mentioned, and though there are barriers, as you mentioned before, there are also students who continue to come, right, to
Hmm.
the UK in particular.
Yeah.
And as I think about my own experience and doing research and having conversations with people like yourself, what I'm beginning to realize is that like the West Coast and really the East Coast are primarily where a lot of students are, matriculating into the UK, but
Mhm.
not just from a geographic region, but also the type of schools in sport. So whether it be
Yeah.
private schools, right? Sports that at least I call them expensive sports, lacrosse, water polo, swimming,
Mhm.
shit that cost a lot of money to compete in.
Yeah.
Do you see or foresee any untapped regions in the United States in regards to where student recruitment can happen into the UK?
Oh, 100%. And I think this is something I'm really passionate about. So if we look at the statistics from our platform, over the past 12 months, states that aren't on that traditional recruitment path, so those in the middle, there's a high percentage of athletes who want to get this information, but they're not seeing people in person. So those student athletes access our platform a lot more. So you'll find that UK universities and universities from Europe, Australia, all over the world, they visit the US to do recruitment activities, but obviously the US is so vast they can't visit everywhere. So they will go to places where there are events, and those events typically end up being California, New York, Florida, those kind of places. So you're not really tapping into those student athletes in Minnesota, Nebraska. We get student athletes signed up to the platform from Alaska and Hawaii, and it's just incredible to see. Oklahoma, we get a lot of students sign up from. So for me, that is one of my biggest passions, allowing student athletes to have the opportunity to learn about going overseas, regardless of where they're from and regardless of the level that they want to play at. And yeah, in terms of those sort of expensive sports, again, that's also my passion. So those student athletes who think from other sports, oh, like I might not be able to afford it, those kind of things, or from, a variety of backgrounds, helping them understand the funding opportunities and helping them to explore the scholarships available. And they can do all of that on the platform by connecting with different universities, whether it's an academic scholarship they're looking for or a competitive athletic scholarship. There's options out there for them. Um, but in terms of the sports that we see the biggest trend of coming over to the UK. Track and field's a big one. American football is in the top five in terms of athletes who access the AFA platform. You've also got volleyball, basketball's a big one. A lot of American collegiate basketball players come over here to the UK. And again, that's for a variety of reasons. They can continue competing collegiately, but also in basketball, volleyball, a handful of other sports. There's opportunities to play at the collegiate level, but also play semi-professionally or professionally too. So that is a huge draw that again is very different to the US model. The athletes see the UK as a pathway to being a full-time professional, whether in Europe or back home. So yeah, something that's very different, but that's why basketball and volleyball again are very popular sports to come here and study and compete in the UK.
Yeah, we can have a follow-up conversation that's unrecorded. 'Cause I have some ideas that we need to talk through for sure with some of the things you just mentioned. But but I want to stay on this for a little bit because, as you know, I focus on internationalization. And so as I'm thinking about, well, let me take a step back. NCAA has 1,100 schools, around 1,200 schools. How many schools are in books?
Oh my goodness, that is a good question. It's over 140. The exact number I can't remember, but
Jeez.
yeah, I think it's about 146. So yeah, a lot of universities. So obviously we have universities in the UK and we refer to them as unis or universities,
Mhm.
but we also have higher education colleges as well. So maybe more equivalent to your sort of like JUCO system.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, some of them are also included in books, but the majority are universities. Yeah, so
good.
and the UK is so small as well. So when we say 146 or whatever the number is, particularly to Americans, they're like, oh my God, there's no universities in the UK. But then the UK itself fits into Texas like 3.5 times. So it's
Mhm.
that's how small our country is. Or well, obviously the UK is made up of different countries, but yeah, that's how small it is. So that is quite a big number actually.
It's interesting. Okay, so then from a US side, then NCAA schools have well historically have used facilities and now NIL to recruit top level talent into their institution. From a UK institution standpoint, how can those institutions in particular, those unis in particular, position themselves to be competitive destinations for US athletes who want to come over? And obviously speaking broadly.
That's a really great point. And I think now more and more universities in the UK are recruiting American athletes and international athletes from other regions. For those racket sports, Asia's a very popular,
Uh,
um, region to recruit from. India is great for cricket recruitment, and we're seeing UK universities become more and more competitive in that space. So just like you mentioned, for those NCAA colleges, the NAIA and other colleges in the States, we're seeing universities put a lot more effort into showcasing their facilities, utilizing existing student athletes to tell their stories on social media, or a lot of UK universities use software that allows prospective student athletes to engage and talk to current students. So we are seeing it become more competitive. I've seen a lot more UK universities have printed out material that is just focused on international student athlete recruitment. 6, 7 years ago, that wasn't really a thing. It was more online. They've got specific collateral, specific information ready and available for their international athletes. And then another thing I've seen quite a lot is that a lot of international athletes obviously want to visit the UK if they get chance to do so before committing to a school. So a lot of UK universities are putting a lot of time and effort into hosting those student athletes and showing them around campus, which yeah, isn't really or wasn't really a typical route for UK institutions, sorry, a few years back. But yeah, as it's becoming more and more competitive, UK universities are having to think outside of the box to attract those athletes and get them to commit.
so okay, what I'm hearing and what we've heard now the last 25, 30 or so minutes at this point, right? There's obviously clear opportunity and a pathway for US athletes to do post grad study and continue their sport in the UK.
Mhm.
AFA is doing their part and not just helping to educate through digital platforms, but also to prioritize access, equity, justice throughout that process in particular, not just from a financial standpoint, but also ensuring that, y'all are recruiting from across the entire United States, not just, specific regions. UK
Yeah.
schools in particular are using facilities, alumni networks, et cetera, to both help with the recruitment, but also alumni engagement, which is super dope. But as I think about the US market, because I mean, this conversation is unique in that obviously you're based in the UK, I'm based in the US, et cetera. Quite farthest we could probably be right now, being in San Diego. But nevertheless, international student enrollment in the United States has been critiqued in a lot of ways over, the last several decades, as a
Mhm.
money-making machine, right? A cash cow, if you will. And then looking at my just Google search quickly, over 1.1 million international students in the US last year,
Mhm.
contributing over $50 billion to the United States economy, which is quite literally insane.
I know.
That's insane. That's it could be a whole nother podcast episode. On the UK side, right? There's obviously increased energy and effort and attention around recruiting athletes.
Yeah.
Not per se, not necessarily for the benefit of boosting the economy per se. That's not my role to, really name. But are schools seeing sport be, a positive contributor to increasing international student enrollment? Is it something that's more of a fad, or is it something that just schools are just copying, each other and saying like this school is doing this and now we're gonna do it? Like, what is, I guess, the true benefit of recruiting American athletes into the UK, especially for post-grad study in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really funny that you mentioned that article because I literally have the same article open on
Yeah,
my laptop because I think it got the information and the news articles all got released today or yesterday. So
yeah,
I was
yeah.
reading through it earlier as well. It's so funny. Yeah, it was a really interesting read. But no, I think that's a really great question. What we're seeing is that UK universities have really witnessed the value of having international athletes within their teams.
Hmm.
So international athletes significantly contribute to the success of the teams in books. And as you can imagine, everybody wants to win. Everyone wants to be as high as they can in that overall books table at the end of the year. So universities are really, really recognizing that value and how much international athletes can contribute to their programs. And I think in particular, when we look at athletes who have studied and competed within the US collegiate setup, regardless of where they're from, whether they're US nationals or from other countries, the setup and the foundations they have not only contribute to their success on the field, but they significantly contribute to the classroom environment as well. All of those skills that athletes have, leadership skills, time management skills, the ability for, to work well in a team, they're great skills that academics are looking for in the classroom. So student athletes aren't only valued really highly on the field, but in the classroom too, here in the UK. So UK universities have really developed their sport recruitment strategies to help to drive that sort of recruitment for those reasons. But of course, all international students, just like in the US, do help to financially contribute to the university because fees are higher than home students. So it would be ignorant of me to not mention that. But I think from the UK perspective in particular, if you speak to any sport department, particularly those in the top 10, 20 of the books tables, they will tell you how much success their international athletes, particularly those that have competed in the NCAA setup in the States, have contributed to their programs over the past few years. And I can literally think of so many athletes off the top of my head who have not only gone and absolutely smashed it in books, they've then gone to the Olympics. They're then winning medals at the Olympics. And a lot of them have gone from the US setup over here to the UK, and they are invaluable in our programs.
Yeah, in some ways it is similar to international athlete recruitment. Then I think the flip is that the U.S. schools recruiting international athletes who competed for the national team to come over, but it's
Mhm.
fully that's interesting. Last two questions before we jump into segment three, Lucy, and the first of which we mentioned political implications earlier, well, probably most notably with presidential elections, especially the recent ones. However, visa immigration policies can also influence, or at least influence conversation in regards to decision making, whether to matriculate into the UK or into the United States. Have you seen the increasing conversation around the graduate route visa in the UK play a role in student decisions in coming to UK?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well, Tim. I think So I think there's always been, or particularly over the past year or so, with everything that's been happening in Australia and the conversations there about putting caps on international student visas,
Hmm.
those kind of things. I think there was a lot of fear that the same thing was going to happen in the UK. Although I've also just been reading that the coalition, the other part of the coalition government in Australia is going to veto that. So fingers crossed they don't bring those caps in, because that will significantly impact international students. But I think coming back to the UK, there was a lot of fear that the graduate route visa was going to be ended. So, for anyone that doesn't know, the graduate route visa allows students, international students in particular, here in the UK to continue working here in the UK for 2 years after they graduate, and they don't have to meet a certain wage threshold. They don't have to meet anything like that. They can explore the job market. They can get experience under their belt. And there was a lot of conversations around the potential for that being scrapped. Now, since the new government are in place, it seems more positive, and that graduate route visa is going to stay in place. So again, we'll keep our fingers crossed because I think it's a fantastic opportunity for student athletes to stay and experience, a different culture. They've experienced the university culture in the UK, but if you experience, the work culture, it's completely different again, and it opens so many like new doors for them. So even if after those 2 years they want to go back to the US or they want to move to a different country, in terms of your resume, those skills that you've learned and being in a different culture and working in a different environment makes you really stand out against other candidates. So for me and from, every university's perspective, it's such a great visa that I just really hope that it doesn't change. But for now, it doesn't look like it's going to.
Yeah, I gotta send you this article. I just might have been a dissertation I just read. One of the two. Nevertheless, it talked about how like international athletes coming to the United States are more like sport labor migrants.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
so versus like pursuing sport as an immigration pathway to the United
Mm.
States. And so how US immigration policies and laws, et cetera, like are it's very interesting. And I think it's a little bit similar, but honestly very different than the UK, given that y'all really opened it up with no
Hmm.
limit, virtually no limitations compared to the US market, which is telling, to say the least.
Very different.
Very telling. Last question for you. We have a thing in the United States over the next 10 years, which people are calling the decade of sports.
Hmm.
Obviously, with the Olympics, Men's World Cup, Women's World Cup, et cetera, Winter Olympics here in 2031. Are you watching what's happening here? And do you see opportunity? Like, where's your head at from what you can or willing to tell us right now? Like, where do you see, like, oh, okay, there might be something that's here looking forward?
I am so jealous that you have this like incredible set of sporting events coming up, and it's not just one to look forward to, like you say. It is so many. And
Wait.
yeah, I mean, I'll be trying to get tickets to absolutely everything, but
Yeah.
I think from our perspectives, Tim, it's just so exciting because I do think that it will drive so much like international interest in sport in the US, but also in terms of tourism, I think a lot of people globally will be, coming over to the US. And from my perspective as someone from the UK and Europe, that's a really exciting time for people to tap into that sports culture in the States because I genuinely think it is so different from anything that we have. It will help people understand it a lot more. And we've had so many conversations, particularly over the past few months. I went to my first baseball game over in the States, and I think there's this sort of misconception in the UK from things that people see on TV that, American sport is just, all for the fans. People spend time not watching the game. And for me, it's so much more than that. And I thoroughly enjoy any sport game I go to in the States because it's so different. But I just enjoyed that baseball game so much because it was so different to anything that we have. People are moving around for the whole game. They're going to get a beer, they're going to get food. But it's just such a sort of family environment and everybody's chatting to each other, and it was just I walked away so happy. Stupidly drove to the Dodgers stadium. We had an event. I know we had an event and it was finishing so close to the game, so we were like, we're gonna have to drive. So I drove. When you just sit in that traffic thinking, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, I am jet lagged. Why have I come to this? I walked away. I was like, I'm so glad I've come to this. So yeah, talking of, international people picking their teams, the
Mm,
Dodgers is now my baseball team. And I know that a lot of international people will choose those big teams, but they were my first team that I saw. I know they were playing your team, so we won't
I
mention.
know. I know.
But
We
they're
got
my
you.
team. Yeah. But it's just so different. And I think for me, it's really exciting that people from Europe can come and see that culture and that sport, that love for sport. Like I've been so lucky to experience over my, you know, 7.5 years working in this particular sector. I just can't wait for more people to see that. And I really hope that when people are over in the States, they can tap into that college sport, environment as well. Because again, it is so different to anything that we have. So yeah, I think it's a very exciting time, but I'm incredibly jealous.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And I think even watching the EPL games on TV, and I'm like, y'all are insane. But then going to that South Carolina game, it's 80,000 people sold out. I'm like, this is also insane. Very
Yeah,
different, but very
yeah.
different at the same time. Well, Lucy, segment three, my friend. We talked about a lot in this conversation and really just scratching the surface for what we'll continue to discuss and facilitate and execute heading into 2025. But how can I, but also our podcast community best support you, AFA, and the work that you're doing over in the UK, but also globally?
I think it's exactly the same as when we had our conversation last September. My one piece of advice, or the one thing I ask anybody that knows about this opportunity, is to tell a student athlete. So we take it for granted that we think lots of people know about this opportunity, but they don't. So, if I meet somebody on an aeroplane, if I meet somebody at a college, I always just say to them, once you've learned about this opportunity for student athletes to study abroad, particularly at that graduate level, tell them about it because you can change their life. And, I speak to so many people who say, I wish I knew about this 5 years ago. I wish I knew about this 4 years ago. And for me, I'm just on a mission to spread the word about it and help as many people learn about this opportunity as possible because it's actually very straightforward. It's very easy to apply to the UK and study here. So yeah, my one request would just be to tell a student athlete about it. And if you want any more information, get in touch with me. I can talk about this for hours. So yeah, that would be my one piece of advice or a request. But yeah, that is that. And I think, you know, I've been so grateful to you and the Walk with TFB community because we've collaborated on so much together already. You help facilitate visits in over in San Diego for Athlete Futures Abroad and the universities who are visiting. But also we have so many exciting things coming up that are top secret for now. I know we can't wait to tell everyone about. But I'm just grateful for, your ongoing collaboration, and I'm just so excited for what 2025 holds for us and the plans that we've got. So I'm just grateful and thank you for having me on the podcast again.
Lucy, it's all love, my friend, my sister, if you will. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure, but also probably a blessing to be honest. Is getting to connect over the last almost 2 years. Sharing what we see in our respective countries, but also exchanging that same knowledge to help each other out. So I want to say thank you for being on agreeing to be on our show again. And yes, definitely looking forward to sharing some exciting news here as we enter 2025. But for everyone else, man, make sure y'all tap in with Lucy and AFA. I'll be sure to include the AFA website and social accounts in the description to this podcast, but also on our social media. Um, what is this? Season 6, episode 1. Look forward to season 6, episode 2 on next week. But as always, until then, walk with me. Peace out.